Picture waking up in a place where the closest neighbor lives 20 miles down the road. Winters stretch on for half the year, and it's not unusual to see more cows or moose than people. Sounds unbelievable, right? Yet for parts of the United States, that's everyday life. Even with a population of around 330 million, huge portions of the country are surprisingly sparse and wide open. So what's driving that emptiness? Is it the harsh, drawn-out winters, the deep isolation of being far from everything, or something even more unexpected? Today, we're breaking down the 10 least populated states in America. And trust me, some of the explanations are going to catch you off guard. The real question is, which of these places do you think you could actually handle living in? Let's dive in and see. Number 10. New Hampshire. Coming in at number 10 is New Hampshire, a state that somehow feels almost empty, even though about 1.37 million people live there. At first glance, that sounds fairly populated, but here's where it gets surprising. New Hampshire is roughly twice the size of Puerto Rico, yet it has only about half as many residents. To really put that into perspective, New York City alone packs around 8.5 million people into just 302 square miles. Meanwhile, New Hampshire spreads across 9,349 square miles, with long stretches where it feels like hardly anyone's around. That works out to about 147 people per square mile, compared to New York City's jaw-dropping 27,000 per square mile. Yeah? Not even close? So why does New Hampshire feel so empty? For starters, it doesn't have any true big cities. Its largest city, Manchester, has only about 115,000 residents, which is roughly the size of a small neighborhood in Los Angeles. Now compare that to Boston, sitting just an hour away with nearly 700,000 people, and it starts to make sense. Many New Hampshire residents simply commute to Boston for work rather than sticking close to home. Then there's the weather, and honestly, it's a big factor. If you're a fan of blizzards, ice storms, and winter temperatures that can dip below minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 29 degrees Celsius, you might feel right at home. For everyone else, not so much. The state averages around 68 inches of snow each year, almost double the national average. And when summer finally shows up, it sticks around for maybe 3 months before the cold starts creeping back in again. Still, New Hampshire isn't all downsides. It's one of only 9 states with no income tax, and it ranks as the second safest state in the entire country. So while it may not be buzzing with activity, at least you can shovel yet another foot of snow without worrying much about crime. Number 9. Maine. At number 9, we've got Maine. And here's a fun but slightly wild fact to start things off. In some Maine towns, moose actually outnumber people. With about 1.36 million residents scattered across a huge 35,385 square miles, the state feels overwhelmingly open and quiet. To put that size into perspective, Maine covers roughly twice the land area of South Korea, a country with more than 52 million people. Meanwhile, Maine can't even hit 1.5 million. So what keeps people away? Let's start with the obvious culprit. Winter. And not the cozy postcard kind. We're talking temperatures dropping to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 28 degrees Celsius, towering snowbanks that can reach 6 feet high, and wind chills so harsh they make everyday life feel like an Arctic survival challenge. Snowfall averages between 80 and 110 inches each year, and in some areas, totals can climb past 130 inches. That's more than double what Chicago typically sees. If spending half the year ice fishing, snowmobiling, or scraping solid frost off your windshield doesn't sound appealing, Maine probably isn't calling your name. The economic picture doesn't help much either. Maine relies heavily on lobster fishing, blueberry farming, and seasonal tourism, but outside of those industries, job options are limited. The median household income sits around $64,000, roughly $9,000 below the national average. And to make things sting a bit more, property taxes here rank among the highest in the country. That said, Maine definitely has its upside, especially if you love nature. About 90% of the state is covered in forest, making it the most heavily forested state in the U.S. Then there's Acadia National Park, which draws over 4 million visitors every year, even though much of the surrounding state remains quiet and sparsely populated. So while Maine may not be the best place to chase a fast-paced career, it does offer something else: wide open forests, endless wildlife, and far more moose and lobster rolls than traffic jams. Number 8. Rhode Island. Number 8 is Rhode Island, and this one's a bit of a curveball. It's the smallest state in the entire country, covering just 1,214 square miles, actually smaller than Los Angeles County. Yet, even with such a tiny footprint, it still ranks among the least populated states, with only about 1.09 million people calling it home. To really drive that home, you could squeeze Rhode Island into Texas more than 220 times, and Texas still manages to have roughly 30 times the population. So what's stopping people from settling here? One major factor is the cost of living. Despite its cozy, small-town feel, Rhode Island is surprisingly expensive. The median home price hovers around $430,000, which is about 50% higher than the national average. Renting isn't much better either. One-bedroom apartments in cities like Providence often run close to $2,000 a month. That's nearly on par with Boston prices, but without the same depth of high-paying job opportunities. And that brings us to employment. While fields like marine trades, healthcare, and education do offer some solid jobs, Rhode Island's economy hasn't exactly been firing on all cylinders. The state has consistently posted one of the higher unemployment rates in New England, sitting around 3.8% in recent years, noticeably above the national average. Then there's the weather, which doesn't do the state any favors. Being near the ocean might sound appealing, but winters here can be bitterly cold, with temperatures frequently dropping to around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 12 degrees Celsius. Summers swing the other way, bringing heavy humidity that makes even 85 degrees Fahrenheit, 29 degrees Celsius, feel oppressive. On top of that, Rhode Island is no stranger to hurricanes, which have caused tens of millions of dollars in damage over the years despite the state's small size. So yes, Rhode Island offers scenic coastlines, deep colonial history, and some seriously top-tier clam chowder. But for many people, it ends up being more of a stopover than a destination, especially for those heading toward bigger hubs like New York. That combination of high costs, limited jobs, and challenging weather helps explain why this tiny state remains one of the least populated in America. Number 7. Montana. Coming in at number 7 is Montana, and this state couldn't be more different from Rhode Island. Montana is absolutely enormous, covering roughly 147,000 square miles, which makes it the fourth largest state in the country. Now here's the part that really messes with your head. Only about 1.08 million people live there. That works out to just 7.3 people per square mile, putting Montana among the least densely populated states in the U.S. For comparison, New Jersey packs around 9.2 million people into an area that's about 90 times smaller. Yeah, that's a huge contrast. So why does Montana feel so empty? Geography plays a massive role. Much of the state is made up of rugged mountains, dense forests, and wide-open plains, which makes large-scale development extremely difficult. It's undeniably beautiful, but scenery doesn't replace grocery stores, hospitals, or steady job opportunities. In fact, some small towns are more than 100 miles away from the nearest Walmart, which gives you an idea of just how remote things can get. Then there's the winter, and Montana does not mess around. The state experiences some of the longest and harshest winters in the country, with temperatures plunging as low as minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 40 degrees Celsius, during the coldest months. Snowstorms are a regular occurrence, and certain areas can see up to 300 inches of snow in a single year. That's more than double what cities like Chicago typically deal with. Not exactly welcoming conditions for most people. Economically, Montana leans heavily on agriculture, mining, and tourism. Outside of those fields, job options are limited. The average salary sits around $52,000, which is roughly 20% below the national average. If you're not interested in farming, ranching, or running a hunting lodge, landing a high-paying job can be a real challenge. Here's the twist, though. Despite how sparse and remote it is, Montana's housing market has been on fire. As people flee crowded cities in search of space and fresh air, home prices have jumped more than 50% over the past 5 years. The average home now costs around $440,000, making it increasingly difficult for longtime residents to afford living there. So while Montana delivers jaw-dropping scenery and endless outdoor adventures, the combination of isolation, extreme weather, limited jobs, and rising housing costs makes it a tough place for most people to put down roots. Number 6. Delaware. Sliding into number 6 is Delaware. Sure, it holds the title of being the first state to join the US, but these days it often feels like people forget it's even there. With a population of just under 989,000, Delaware ranks as the sixth least populated state in the country. And let's be honest, plenty of folks probably couldn't point it out on a map without a little help. The state itself is tiny, covering only 1,949 square miles, which means you can drive from one end to the other in less than an hour. So why isn't Delaware growing faster? One big reason is the lack of excitement. The largest city, Wilmington, has only about 70,000 residents, making it feel more like a college town than a major urban center. Outside of that, you're mostly looking at small towns, farmland, and a stretch of beaches. If you're hoping for buzzing nightlife, towering skylines, or nonstop entertainment, Delaware just doesn't deliver. Cost is another sticking point. Even though the state doesn't charge a sales tax, which sounds amazing at first, housing prices have climbed fast. The median home price now sits around $385,000, and rent has increased by roughly 20% over the past 5 years. That's a tough pill to swallow when the average salary is only about $60,000. The economy adds another layer to the problem. Delaware is famous for hosting tons of major corporations thanks to its business-friendly laws. But many of those jobs aren't actually based in the state. A large number of workers commute to nearby cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, or even Washington, D.C. instead of living locally. As a result, Delaware sees high outbound migration, with many residents packing up for places like Florida, Texas, or North Carolina in search of better job prospects and cheaper living. Then there's the environmental concern, and it's a big one. Delaware is one of the fastest sinking states in the country due to rising sea levels. More than 15% of its land is considered at high risk for flooding, and some scientists warn that parts of the state could be underwater within the next 50 years. Yeah, that's unsettling. So while Delaware does offer pretty beaches and some of the lowest overall taxes in the US, it still struggles to stand out. Between limited entertainment, rising costs, and long-term climate risks, it's easy to see why so few people choose to call this often overlooked state home. Number 5. South Dakota. At number 5 is South Dakota, a place so sparsely populated that cows outnumber people by a wide margin. And no, that's not an exaggeration. While only about 886,000 people live in the state, there are roughly 3.7 million cows spread across its farmland. Do the math, and that comes out to nearly 5 cows for every single person roaming around South Dakota's wide-open spaces. So what's behind all that emptiness? Size is a big part of it. South Dakota stretches across 77,116 square miles, which is roughly the same area as all of New England combined. Yet its population is smaller than that of San Francisco alone. The issue is pretty simple. There just isn't much concentrated activity. The largest city, Sioux Falls, has around 213,000 residents. After that, the numbers fall off fast. Rapid City comes in second with only about 77,000 people, and most towns across the state don't even break 5,000 residents. It's about as middle of nowhere as it gets. The weather doesn't help either. South Dakota swings hard in both directions. Summers can climb to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, while winters regularly plunge to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 34 degrees Celsius. Snow is another challenge, with more than 40 inches falling each year and occasional 10-foot snowdrifts that can shut down roads entirely. Getting around in winter can feel more like survival than commuting. Economically, the state leans heavily on agriculture and tourism. Attractions like Mount Rushmore draw about 3 million visitors annually, but outside of farming and tourism-related work, job options are limited. Wages tend to lag behind the national average, with a median household income of around $66,000. To be fair, South Dakota does have its advantages. It's one of the most tax-friendly states in the country, with no state income tax and a relatively low cost of living. Still, let's be honest, if you're not into farming, quiet small-town life, or dealing with extreme weather year-round, it's easy to understand why people aren't lining up to move here. It's peaceful, it's rural, and unless wide-open space is your thing, you might quickly find yourself asking the same question everyone else does. Where is everybody? Number 4. North Dakota. If South Dakota felt empty, North Dakota somehow manages to take it a step further. Despite spanning roughly 70,700 square miles, making it larger than England, only about 779,000 people live here. That puts North Dakota firmly in fourth place among the least populated states in the country. And here's a stat that really drives it home. It's also the least visited state in America. With around 22 million visitors per year, fewer people come to North Dakota annually than visit Walt Disney World in a single year. So what keeps people away? Let's start with the winters because they're downright brutal. North Dakota is infamous for extreme cold and even holds records for some of the lowest temperatures ever recorded in the U.S. At one point, a staggering minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 51 degrees Celsius, was reported here. Annual snowfall can exceed 50 inches, and with relentless winds tearing across the flat plains, blizzards can stretch on for days, effectively shutting the state down. The economy is another mixed bag. North Dakota became well known for oil production during the boom years of the early 2000s. But when oil prices fell, many of those jobs disappeared just as quickly as they arrived. The median household income sits around $68,000, which sounds decent on paper, but that number doesn't tell the full story. In oil boom towns, housing costs spiked so sharply that many residents still struggle to make ends meet. As for city life, don't expect much of it. The largest city, Fargo, has about 135,000 residents, roughly the size of a small Los Angeles neighborhood. Beyond Fargo, the landscape is dominated by farmland and tiny towns where everybody knows everybody else. There's even a running joke that if you move to North Dakota, you'll make friends fast, mostly because there just aren't that many people around to choose from. To be fair, the state does have its positives. North Dakota boasts one of the lowest crime rates in the nation and is often ranked as a great place to raise a family. Still, let's be real. It takes a certain kind of toughness to endure sub-zero winters, endless empty highways, and living hours away from anything resembling a major city. Given all that, it's not hard to understand why so many people end up leaving North Dakota as soon as they get the chance. Number 3. Alaska. Coming in at number 3 is Alaska, and calling it big almost feels like an understatement. This state is absolutely enormous, spanning about 663,268 square miles. In fact, it's larger than Texas, California, and Montana combined. And yet, all that space is home to just around 733,000 people. That breaks down to roughly one person per square mile. Compare that to New Jersey, which crams in about 1,200 people per square mile, and the difference is almost hard to process. So why does Alaska remain so sparsely populated? The biggest reason is the climate, no contest. Alaska experiences some of the harshest winters on the planet, with temperatures in certain regions plunging as low as minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 62 degrees Celsius. In northern communities like Utqiagvik, the sun disappears entirely for about 2 straight months each winter. Imagine going weeks without seeing daylight at all. Then summer flips the script, bringing nearly 24 hours of sunlight, which sounds amazing until you realize it completely wrecks your sleep schedule. Isolation is another major hurdle. Most of Alaska isn't connected by roads. Only about 20% of the state can be reached by car. For everywhere else, getting around means hopping on a plane, taking a boat, or riding a snowmobile. That remoteness drives up everyday costs, especially food. In smaller towns, a single gallon of milk can cost around $10, and fresh produce is often scarce or wildly overpriced. From an economic standpoint, Alaska does well in industries like oil, fishing, and tourism, but options outside those fields are limited. The average salary is around $75,000, which sounds solid until you factor in the cost of living, about 35% higher than the national average. To offset that, the state literally pays people to stay. Through the permanent fund dividend, every resident receives an annual check, usually between $1,000 and $2,000, just for living in Alaska. Despite all the challenges, Alaska is undeniably stunning. It's home to Denali, the tallest mountain in North America, along with more than 100,000 glaciers scattered across the landscape. Still, let's be real. Unless you're genuinely into extreme cold, deep isolation, and the occasional grizzly bear wandering nearby, it's easy to understand why most Americans admire Alaska from afar rather than calling it home. Number 2. Vermont. Landing at number 2 is Vermont. And let's be real, it's one of those states people often forget about entirely. Even with its postcard-perfect scenery, peaceful vibe, and legendary maple syrup, only about 643,000 people live here. That makes Vermont the second least populated state in the entire country. And here's a stat that really puts things into perspective. The city of Portland alone has around 652,000 residents, meaning more people live there than in all of Vermont combined. So why does Vermont remain so sparsely populated? One big reason is the lack of activity and opportunity. The largest city, Burlington, has just about 45,000 people, smaller than many college campuses. Beyond that, the state is dominated by small, rural towns. While that quiet, laid-back lifestyle appeals to some, it also means no major industries, no large business centers, and very little in the way of nightlife or big city entertainment. Then there's winter, and Vermont gets hit hard. It ranks among the snowiest states in the U.S., averaging roughly 90 inches of snow every year. That's about double what Chicago sees. Temperatures frequently dip below -10 degrees Fahrenheit, and blizzards are a regular occurrence. It stops feeling magical pretty quickly when you're digging your car out of 3 feet of snow just to make it to work. Jobs don't help much either. Vermont's economy leans heavily on agriculture, tourism, and small local businesses, but high-paying career options are limited. The median household income sits around $70,000, which sounds decent, until you factor in the high cost of living, especially housing. Because of that imbalance, more people move out of Vermont than move in. Another major factor is the state's aging population. Vermont has one of the oldest populations in the country, with a median age of about 43.1 years. Younger residents often leave in search of better job prospects in cities like Boston or New York, leaving behind a population that skews older and more retired. So while Vermont is a dream destination for skiing, maple syrup lovers, and fall foliage fans, it continues to fly under the radar. Peaceful and beautiful as it is, those same qualities help explain why Vermont remains one of the most overlooked and least populated states in America. Number 1, Wyoming. Taking the top spot as the emptiest state in America is Wyoming, and it's not even close. With only about 576,000 residents, Wyoming has fewer people than Washington, D.C. Even crazier? The city of Milwaukee alone has around 577,000 people, meaning one mid-sized city has more residents than the entire state of Wyoming. So why does almost no one live here? First off, Wyoming is enormous. It spans roughly 97,813 square miles, making it the 10th largest state in the country. Yet it has the smallest population. That works out to about 6 people per square mile. If your dream is endless open land with no neighbors in sight, Wyoming delivers. For most people, though, that level of emptiness feels less peaceful and more unsettling. Weather is another major deal breaker. Wyoming winters are harsh, with temperatures in some areas dropping to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, -40 degrees Celsius. Add heavy snowfall, ice storms, and winds that can hit 60 miles per hour, and everyday life becomes a real challenge. In rural parts of the state, getting snowed in for days at a time isn't unusual at all. And just to keep things interesting, Wyoming also averages around a dozen tornadoes each year, some of which can be pretty severe. The economy doesn't do much to draw people in either. Wyoming relies heavily on coal, oil, and tourism, but as demand for fossil fuels declines, so do job opportunities. The median household income sits around $68,000, which is slightly above the national average. Still, with limited industries and few career paths, many younger residents end up moving elsewhere in search of better prospects. City life isn't exactly an option here either. Wyoming barely has any real cities to speak of. The largest, Cheyenne, has just over 65,000 people. The second largest, Casper, comes in at around 58,000. After that, population numbers drop off fast, leaving the state without any major urban centers. That said, Wyoming is absolutely stunning. It's home to iconic places like Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton National Park, along with some of the most breathtaking mountain scenery in the country. Still, unless you're a rancher, a cowboy, or a hardcore nature enthusiast, everyday life in Wyoming can be a tough sell. And that's exactly why it continues to hold the title of America's emptiest state.